Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode, Chief Midegah and the makers of the lost bark. By way of explanation, if you haven't heard yet, Chief Midegah is a Native American who has been making the rounds on Mormon channels, Mormon podcast channels, really for the last month, at least since the beginning of June 2024. Today's date that I'm recording this is June 28th, 2024. And already Chief Midegah has gone to a number of different channels. He's been on some of the Heartland channels, Book of Mormon Heartland channels. He's also made his way onto the Quick Show with Greg Mattson. And he has most recently, to my knowledge, gone on the Ward Radio, the Psych Ward Radio podcast, where he has been talking there as well. Essentially, his message is that he has some Birch Bark Scrolls. And not only he has them, but others have them in his tribe as well. In fact, there are thousands of them. Hence the title of tonight's show, Chief Midegah and the Makers of the Lost Bark. Now, these bark scrolls have been lost or unknown to most of humanity. However, he claims that they have been known to him and to those who hold on to them as well. So this is a subject that is making waves in Mormonism, and I wanted to take some time to address it here on Radio Free Mormon. I have listened to many, many hours of Chief Midegah talking, and I will tell you that it has been a bit of a challenge for me to be able to listen to everything he has to say and then condense out of it what it is that I want to address on this program. And of course, what I want to address on this program is the Mormon connection that he claims to have between these scrolls and the Book of Mormon, between these scrolls and Mormonism, which is why he's getting so much attention from Mormons, because he seems to be the flavor of the month in showing how ancient Native American traditions support the Book of Mormon. This is a road we've been down many times before. And when you get to be my age, which is 64 years old, you actually live long enough that you can remember the last time it happened. I don't have to go back to a history book and look at it. I know it happened because it happened when I was younger. This is the basic idea of talking about how Native American myths and stories find echoes in the Book of Mormon or in the Bible. We saw this a number of decades ago with He Walks America. And even when I joined the church in the late 1970s, the official church missionary literature in the form of pamphlets had at least one pamphlet that I got from the missionaries that I read that talked about all the connections between ancient Native American lore and the Book of Mormon. And I remember it talked about Quetzalcoatl, and it talked about the Great White God. And what could this be but a reference to the Native American legend that preserved the visit of Jesus Christ to the Nephites? So indeed, this has been going on a long time. Now, the twist to this time is that we have an individual in Chief Midegah who's a middle-aged man. He's a good-looking man. He's very, very eloquent. He's a very articulate man, and he has a great deal of messages that he likes to talk about, only one of which is the connections, alleged connections, I should say, with the Book of Mormon. One of the other things that he is very passionate about is talking about grievances with the United States government on behalf of the Native Americans, and grievances even with the Canadian government on behalf of Native Americans. Now, for purposes of this show, I'm not interested in that. What I want to focus on is the Mormon connection, because this is Radio Free Mormon. He will also want to talk a great deal about his ancestry, tribal connections, historical things such as that, which don't interest us here either. And the reason I bring that up is because in listening to hours and hours of him, I've had to wade through all those other different subjects that he is very passionate about and that he talks about in order to try and find the kernels of information that he does talk about, which interest us here. And it is interesting to note that when he is on these other Mormon podcasts, for every hour that he will talk, he will address these other issues for probably about 55 minutes and talk about the Mormon connection stuff, maybe for 5 minutes. It's relatively infrequent when looking at the overall body of what it is that he's produced. But that is the stuff that I have been listening to hours and hours of his podcast for, trying to winnow out, trying to get clips from, and trying to get my head around what it is that he's saying in order to try and present an accurate and fair depiction of his argument. And having done that, I'm going to try and present that to you this evening. Now, here is a title slide. Yes, this is where Chief Midegah, you can see there's a picture of him in the middle, good-looking young man, Chief Midegah and the makers of the lost bark. And this was their conversation with Chief Midegah. And anytime Chief Midegah would say anything that was even remotely, possibly, tangentially associated with Mormonism or the Book of Mormon, our hero, Cardin Ellis, would totally fangirl all over the place. It was really quite a spectacle, I must say. But this show is not about Cardin Ellis. It's about Chief Midegah. So let's talk about Chief Midegah and a summary of his teachings. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Birch Bark Scrolls are currently possessed by Native Americans. Chief Midegah has 4 such Birch Bark Scrolls. These scrolls have been hidden and, when interpreted, support the Book of Mormon. Chief Midegah has shown one of his scrolls to sympathetic Mormons who have podcasted about it. Though not permitted to show the scroll, and though instructed to not talk about certain aspects of the scroll, they have been permitted to describe certain elements of the scroll. Chief Midegah claims to have or have had an appointment with an LDS apostle regarding the contents of his scroll. Now, under the heading of Nothing New Under the Sun, this type of attempt to link Book of Mormon teachings with Native American folklore has been going on a long time. It was mentioned in pamphlets I received from the elders in 1978. But the attempt to link Christianity and Judaism to Native American folklore has been going on for hundreds of years. There is no doubt that Native American stories contain elements from the Bible, and more especially from the Old Testament. The most common stories that show up in Native American tradition are variations of 1, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve; number 2, the flood; number 3, the Tower of Babel; and 4, Moses getting the law from Mount Sinai. I don't know why it is, but those are the stories that typically show up the most frequently in Native American lore. The question, though, is the source of these legends. Do these similar motifs between Native American myth and the Bible mean that the Native Americans are Hebrew in origin? See, that's the argument that's being made. The Native Americans are Hebrew in origin, just like the Book of Mormon says, and these traditions reflect some of the elements from the Old Testament, maybe a little bit of the Book of Mormon if we squint our eyes real close and don't look at it too hard, but maybe the Book of Mormon, and therefore, this is evidence that the Book of Mormon is true, that it is what it says it is. Of course, the first problem you have is DNA, because even if you're going to say that there are Hebrew legends in the Native American tradition, and even if that's true, and I think there is some truth in that, then are you saying that they received these stories down from father to son from the very beginning, from the time that they came over from Jerusalem? Are you saying that they are Hebrew in origin? And it seems that that is something of what is being said here as well. The problem being the DNA, and that there's no Middle Eastern DNA in any of the Native American tribes. So that doesn't seem like a likely explanation. I mean, it seems unlikely enough at the outset, but even that small sliver of likelihood that that's true kind of gets blown away by the fact that there's no DNA evidence from the Middle East. I know the people at the Heartland Theory are trying to work their way around it. Creativity is the soul of invention. However, that is the state of the science currently. No DNA from the Middle East among Native Americans. Therefore, these stories from the Bible that we do find in Native American lore, we got to look for another source that they came from. And we have it. The source is very simple, and I'll get to that here in a second. So the question was, do these similar motifs between Native American myth and the Bible mean that the Native Americans are Hebrew in origin? Answer, no, it doesn't mean that. How else can these apparent commonalities be accounted for? We'll get to that. The question boils down to whether this small cluster of Native American myths were created before contact with Europeans or after contact with Europeans, i.e., are these myths pre-contact or post-contact? What do I mean by that? Let's go over a little bit of history, shall we? And it will become clear. First off, we're going to talk about South America and southern Mexico when it comes to European conquest of the Native Americans. European conquest of Native Americans. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. That's something even I can remember. Within only about 20 years, Believe it or not, within only about 20 years of Columbus, the Spanish had arrived and conquered the Aztecs, which occurred in 1519 to 1521. You see, that's it's 30 years. 30 years later. Later in the same century, the Spanish conquered the Incas, and that was concluded in 1572. The Spanish were intent on converting the conquered Native Americans to Christianity and sent missionaries. See, once they were conquered, the Spanish were very, very keen on converting the Native Americans to Christianity in the form of Catholicism. And friars were sent over and missionaries were sent over in order to convert the Native Americans. Because they were conquered, the Native Americans had limited options as to how they could respond to the missionary efforts of those who had conquered them. They're not in a position to say, take your religion and shove it. No, they have to respond in a different manner because these are subjugated peoples. And the Spanish who are trying to convert them are the conquerors. So this isn't like being a Mormon missionary and knocking on a door and saying, Mrs. Brown, would you like to hear more about Jesus visiting America? No, there's an equal kind of footing there. And Mrs. Brown is totally free to close the door and say, no, thank you. But if you do that to a conquered race, they can't just close the door and say, no, thank you. No, their response has to be more respectful than that. Otherwise, things could get worse. There are two basic responses that Native Americans could give to the Christianizing efforts of the Spanish missionaries. Native Americans could accept some of the teachings and stories from the Catholic missionaries out of respect and or compliance. These teachings and stories would then be incorporated into Native American myth and tradition. So there is an assimilation of sorts, or at least a transmission of Christian and Bible teachings going from the Spanish to the Native Americans, even at this early date. And as I say, the Native Americans there, the Aztecs or the Incas, have only a couple of choices. They could either accept parts of these teachings from the Spanish and incorporate them into their tradition out of respect or out of compliance, or there's another possibility, which is actually favored by Professor Tom Murphy. I've spoken with him for a number of hours regarding this episode before I podcasted on it. So I want to thank Tom Murphy for taking the time to talk with me and credit him for everything I get right. Everything I get wrong, on the other hand, that's going to be my responsibility. But the second response is the one that's favored by Professor Tom Murphy. And that response is this: although Native Americans could not afford to be defiant of the Spanish missionaries, they could nonetheless express a tacit defiance by claiming to have the Bible stories already in their tradition. In other words, the Native Americans could legitimately say they didn't need the missionary story about the creation or the missionary story about Adam and Eve or the flood because they already had a similar story in their own Native American tradition. Now, this would be something that was told to the Spanish. It wasn't really true, but it was done as a way to passively resist the missionary efforts of the Spanish Catholic missionaries. So the missionaries come to the conquered Inca and say, we've got this great story, and it's about the Tower of Babel, where the people tried to build a tower up to the sky, and God got angry and destroyed the tower and mixed up the languages of all the people. This is a story that was told frequently to account for why it is that everybody has different languages. So we can imagine a Catholic friar teaching this to a conquered Native American culture and have a person or people in that culture say in response, well, we already have a story about a big tower tried to be built to the sky, and God destroyed it and mixed the languages of everybody. Now, at that point, under this theory, that's completely made up. There is no such story in Indian lore. The reason they're saying there is in order to passively resist the missionary attempts of the conquerors. With the result, however, that if you are the missionary from Spain who is trying to convert these people and you're telling them a story from the Bible, and the Native Americans say, oh, we already have that story, you're going to go, oh my gosh, these people know the stories from the Bible. They're Jewish. They really are Jewish. These are the lost 10 tribes, just like we thought. And we know it now because they have stories from the Bible that they couldn't possibly have known about except for the fact that they must be Jewish. So those are the two responses that are proposed that Native Americans could give to the missionary efforts of the Spanish. And notice that regardless of what the response is, there's going to be this transmission from Spanish European culture into the Native American culture of these Bible stories and sometimes even the Bible concepts. Bible stories introduced into Native American myth and tradition. We know from history that part of the European conquest of Native Americans involved an aggressive missionary program. We know that missionaries proselyted Native Americans heavily. We know that part of that proselyting effort was the presentation of Bible stories. So we know that Native Americans were taught these stories starting around 500 years ago. It is clear some degree of cultural transmission would have occurred. The question is whether this is where the similarities between the Bible and some Native American myths come from. Now, the question of whether these Bible stories, this cluster of Bible stories showing up in some Native American folklore, was very important to Christians hundreds of years ago because they saw this as evidence that the Native Americans were the lost tribes of Israel, and therefore they needed to be converted to Christianity even more so, as part of what they felt was their divine command to go and convert the Jewish people. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. But at least for the last 100 years, fewer and fewer people even care about these connections. Fewer and fewer people even know about these connections. Frankly, the fact that few people know about them lends it cyclically to the resurrection of these very same traditions and a new wave or a new generation of Mormons going ooh and ah over things that have been known about for hundreds of years. It's just that it comes cyclically. We forget about it. It's brought up again. Everybody goes, wow, that's incredible. And this wave will fade off and then it will lie dormant for 20 more years and someone else will come up and bring up the same connections and everybody will go, wow, that's great. That's incredible. I never heard of that before. Even though these connections are longstanding and have been known about for centuries. But there is one group, there's one church, there's one religion that still cares an awful lot about these connections, and that is Mormonism. And the reason they care about these connections is because even though the rest of the Christian world doesn't really care anymore because it doesn't impact their teachings, if indeed the Native Americans were Hebrew, it doesn't impact your regular Christians' day-to-day observance of their religion. But it does for Mormons because it proves the Book of Mormon is true in their minds. And that's why it's always the Mormons that snap this up like popcorn. And an example of that is a book that came out, I think it was in the 1970s. It's called The Americas Before Columbus by Dewey Farnsworth. And I had this book back in the early 1980s. I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I was a passionate defender, an apologist for the LDS Church. And as such, I read numbers of books, including this book, The Americas Before Columbus. Now, what The Americas Before Columbus is a collection of diaries or journal entries or statements, usually by Spanish missionaries, talking about how astounded they were that the Native Americans that they were teaching, who were conquered by the Spanish, have these different stories from the Old Testament and how amazing that is. And so there's a great deal of literature like this from hundreds of years ago from the Spanish missionaries that got written down or transmitted and then collected by Dewey Farnsworth and put into this book, The Americas Before Columbus. The idea being, of course, that this proves that the Book of Mormon is true. Now, the title, The Americas Before Columbus, is one of the worst or most misleading or perhaps most inaccurate titles in the history of inaccurate titles because this does not reflect, at least according to the opinion of most scholars, these connections between the Bible and Native American tradition do not reflect the Americas before Columbus. It actually reflects the Americas after Columbus because these stories from the Bible in Native American lore happen after Columbus arrives to America, and they almost certainly were taught to the Native Americans by the Spanish Europeans in the first place. So we've got a situation where Columbus comes over, the Spanish come over, the missionaries come over, and they teach the Native Americans about the Christian religion. And then either while they're teaching them or later, others find out that there's these Bible stories in Native American tradition, and they go, holy crap, how did they know this? Well, they're the ones who taught it to them in the first place. That's how they know this. That's the funny part about it. But now it's seen as evidence for the Book of Mormon. And I also wanted to share with you a quote from this book. Let me make sure that we can see this book right now. This is called The Quest for the Gold Plates. It is Thomas Stewart Ferguson's archaeological search for the Book of Mormon. It is by Stan Larson. I've read this book last year, I think it was, and I was hoping to find time at some point to do sort of a book review on this because it's an absolutely fascinating story. But as part of this, I wanted to read a few passages that fall in line with this idea about where it was that Native Americans got these stories in their folklore that seem to resemble Bible stories. This is on page 16, and Stan Larson, in writing about Thomas Ferguson, says this: the book Ancient America and the Book of Mormon, which was a book that Thomas Ferguson was involved in writing, was published in November 1950 and presented for the first time in English, a translation of the early 17th century historical account of Fernando de Alva Ixtlilxochitl, which I hope is an approximation of how it's correctly pronounced. My apologies. But this is Ixtlilxochitl, and how this material related to the claims of the Book of Mormon. So actually, Thomas Ferguson is one of the first to have engaged in this practice, for the LDS Church at least. It goes on. Hunter and Ferguson. Hunter was a co-author. Hunter and Ferguson uncritically accepted anything in Ixtlilxochitl that seemed to correlate with the Book of Mormon, and never distinguished between genuine native tradition and post-Columbian influence due to Spanish Catholicism. See, he's talking about the exact same thing. Ferguson felt that the account of Ixtlilxochitl seemed to sustain the existence of the Book of Mormon in rather direct fashion. A knowledge of the ancient 4th century sacred compilation was known in 16th century Mexico. Others have not found the parallels between Ixtlilxochitl and biblical chronology, events, and doctrines so impressive, because Ixtlilxochitl, though a grandson of the Aztec king of Texcoco, had been raised a Christian. So this person who is Ixtlilxochitl, who ages ago is writing down these Native American traditions and stories, and there's some biblical connections in them. Thomas Ferguson looks at that and says, Book of Mormon is true. Other scholars look at it and say this, that they are not so impressed with the connections because the person who wrote it down had been raised a Christian. He had been raised a Christian. One scholar cautioned that Ixtlilxochitl was doubtless strongly influenced by Christian instruction, which would have tinged his sources of Indian creation, the flood, the ark, a Babel-type tower, and a confusion of tongues with subsequent scattering of population. Each of these suspect items, these stories, was used in their quotations from Ixtlilxochitl, the creation of the world. So in other words, this is what Ferguson used. The creation of the world, the deluge, that's the flood, and the ark, and building a very high tower, followed by changed languages and dispersed peoples. In an unpublished review of this book, Ancient Americas and the Book of Mormon, Charles E. Dibble, professor of anthropology at the University of Utah, pointed out the problem of acculturation, which has special application to the various writings of Ixtlilxochitl, in that every native source dealing with native cultures subsequent to 1492 is potentially able to reflect Christian theology. J. Reuben Clark Jr., second counselor in the LDS First Presidency, also warned that one must be most careful to see that these traditions of the Indians, sorry about that, that's in the quote, that these traditions of the Indians or Native Americans are not the result of the early teachings of the Catholic priests. So let me read that again. One must be most careful. This is second counselor in the First Presidency, J. Reuben Clark Jr., wrote that we must be very careful to see that these traditions of the Native Americans are not the result of the early teachings of the Catholic priests. See, that's the problem that's going on here. Are these traditions pre-contact or are they post-contact? And that makes all the difference. I am not aware of any solid evidence that any of these traditions that relate to the Bible are actually pre-contact. They come from adulterated sources, and they were adulterated by the Catholic priests and missionaries themselves. So let's go on with this slideshow. We've talked about the Native Americans in South America and southern Mexico. We've talked about the Incas and the Aztecs, and we've talked about the Spanish conquerors coming over and the missionary work they did in trying to convert the Native Americans that they had conquered. But this did not just happen by the Spanish. As we know, once again, continuing with the history lesson, I'll be brief, I promise. The European missionary effort wasn't restricted to southern Mexico and South America. The same thing happened at a later date in North America, where the conquerors/missionaries were primarily the English, French, and Dutch. These Europeans also subjugated the Native Americans and sought to convert them to Christianity, just like the Spanish had done earlier in the South. Again, there was a cultural transmission of biblical stories from the Europeans to the myths and traditions of the North American Native Americans. This appears to be what Chief Midegah is talking about, much to the delight of Mormons who see in this a corroboration and validation of their own religious beliefs. And indeed, this is exactly what View of the Hebrews was about, written 200 years ago, minus a year now. 1825, I think, was the date of publication, but it's been 200 years, give or take, since View of the Hebrews was published, and that was authored by Ethan Smith. And as we know, and as I've read, and as I've podcasted about, this book is an attempt to gather different evidence from the traditions and the stories of the Native Americans in that day and corroborate those with the Bible to prove that the Native Americans were indeed from the lost tribes of the house of Israel. Otherwise, how could these stories possibly have a connection between the Native American tradition and the Bible? The other thing I found while reading the View of the Hebrews is that many of these stories and the connections between the traditions of the Native Americans and the Bible are very tenuous. They're really stretched thin. In other words, you can tell the person who's writing this, Ethan Smith, is looking for connections and is willing to really stretch the point in order to find them. A similar thing happens, I think, with some of the traditions that Chief Midegah brings forward and the efforts, not so much of Chief Midegah, at least not so far as I've seen, but the very sympathetic Mormons who will listen to what he has to say and will jump to all the conclusions about taking whatever he says and stretching the point to make the connection with Mormonism. This is how the game is played. It's how the game was played 200 years ago with View of the Hebrews. It's how the game is played today with Chief Midegah and the makers of the Lost Bark. Now, Chief Midegah is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he talks at one point in one of his interviews about going to the temple the first time to get his endowment. And when he received the signs and the tokens, he said he already knew them, and he knew them from the tradition that he had received as a Native American from his ancestors. So how could that possibly be? Well, that might be really amazing if indeed the Mormon temple ceremony were completely original to the Mormons. Unfortunately, we know that the temple ceremony for the LDS Church was derived in large part from the Masonic temple ceremony. And indeed, the same tokens and signs that are used by the Masons are also used by the Mormons in their temple. So the similarity in the signs and the tokens between Mormonism and Native American tradition could be because they derive from the same source, i.e. Masonry. And believe it or not, when I was talking to Professor Thomas Murphy, he told me that not only was there an all-out effort on the part of the Europeans to convert the Native Americans to Christianity, they also wanted to convert them to Masonry. There was an attempt not only to Christianize the Native Americans, but also to Masonize them. And through that process, introducing them to the different rites and rituals and transferring to the Native Americans the knowledge of, among other things, the signs and the tokens. And to the extent that Chief Midegah did see connections and similarities between LDS temple signs and tokens and his own Native American tradition, that is likely explained because of the injection of the Masonic element into the Native American culture in the 18th and 19th centuries by the white Europeans coming over to teach and proselyte the Native Americans, not only with Christianity, but also with Masonry. And interestingly, according to my discussion with Professor Murphy, let me see if I have a slide for this. The hotbed for the attempts not only to Christianize the Native Americans, but also to Masonize them, to teach them Masonry, was at a school that you may have heard of. So Europeans didn't just push Christianity. The Europeans also sought to introduce Native Americans to Masonry. The hotbed of European attempts to convert Native Americans to Christianity as well as to Masonry appears to have been Moore's Indian Charity School at Dartmouth. That's right. All roads seem to lead to Dartmouth in this regard. As I went back and did some research, people have been talking and writing about similarities between Native American traditions and Masonry since at least the 1860s in the United States. When Chief Midegah talks about connections between his traditions and the Mormon temple ceremony, it is likely caused by the introduction of Masonry to Native Americans centuries ago by the European. So, having given a brief overview of this type of argumentation that cycles around every 20 or 25 years, like Pennywise coming out of the sewers of Derry, this argument that similarities between traditions in Native American lore and the Bible must mean that the Book of Mormon is true, and showing why that does not necessarily follow. In fact, it's unlikely, and that there's another method for these stories arriving in the Native American lore, which was from Europeans coming over, conquering them, and then trying to convert them to Christianity. That is the likely source of the interjection of those stories into the Native American tradition. Not that they had them forever and they actually came from Jerusalem thousands of years ago. As I say, having gone over that in brief, let's talk a little bit about Chief Midegah, who is a very interesting character, as I've said. He says that he is a member of the Ojibwa. I think it is the Ojibwa tribe. So I did some research on that and wanted to share it with you here very quickly. The Ojibwa are an Anishinaabe people whose homeland covers much of the Great Lakes region, extending into the subarctic and throughout the northeastern woodlands. Ojibwe, being indigenous peoples of the northeastern woodlands and of the subarctic, are known by several names, including Ojibwe or Chippewa. Now, Chippewa I've heard of, and I have to confess it's because of the song "The Legend Lives On" from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. So thank you, Gordon Lightfoot. So this is the Chippewa tribe, also known as Ojibwe or Ojibwe. As a large ethnic group, several distinct nations also understand themselves to be Ojibwe as well, including these three tribes, the Saulteaux, Nipissings, and Oji Cree. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see, and there's the location of the Chippewa or the Ojibwa tribe. It covers a vast area along what is now the United States-Canadian border and in and around the Great Lakes. Lake Superior being, of course, Gitche Gumee. I then looked up the connection between the Ojibwa people and birch bark and writing on birch bark because I was very interested in finding out more about this practice. It is a real practice and it's been going on for a long time. From this article, this is from Wikipedia. The Ojibwa are known for their birch bark canoes, birch bark scrolls, mining, and trade in copper, as well as their harvesting of wild rice and maple syrup. Their Midewewin Society is well respected as the keeper of detailed and complex scrolls of events, oral history, songs, maps, memories, stories, geometry, and mathematics. Now, it is interesting to note that this second statement failed verification. We have the footnote number 7, and there's the footnote down below it, but apparently it failed verification. So these statements may not be verified. I'm not saying they're not true, but they're not verified, at least according to the Wikipedia. And that was the part about this society is well respected as the keeper of detailed and complex scrolls of events, oral history, songs, maps, memories, stories, geometry, and mathematics. So not all of that is verified, but obviously at least somebody is trying to include it in the article. Here is an example of a birch bark scroll. If you go to the internet and you Google birch bark scrolls and click images, you get tons and tons of these images. They're actually quite beautiful. I had never heard of the birch bark scrolls before. And I am glad that I had. So you can see this is the type of figures that are made on these birch bark scrolls. It looks like here's a table. There's 4 people on one side of the table, 4 people on the other side of the table. There's other things that are going on in this picture that I don't know, that you probably have to be a tribal member or somebody who is well versed in their lore to decipher. But this is the way some of those birch bark scrolls appear. The construction of birch bark scrolls is interesting. I mean, how do they make these? The bark of the paper birch tree provides an excellent writing material. Usually, a stylus of either bone, metal, or wood is used to inscribe these ideographs on the soft inner bark. So you have the soft inner bark and the harder bark on the outside. Black charcoal is often used to fill the scratches to make them easier to see. To form a scroll, pieces of inscribed bark are stitched together using wadab, cedar or spruce roots. To prevent unrolling, the scroll is lashed, then placed in a cylindrically shaped birch bark box. And now, halfway through this part of the article, we'll see that there are no citations for any of these last statements I'm going to make. Scrolls were recopied after so many years and stored in dry locations, often underground in special containers or in caves. Now, notice there's a citation needed for that statement. Once again, I'm not saying it's not true, but there's no citation for it. Elders recopied the scrolls over time, and some were hidden away in remote areas for safekeeping. Citation needed again. Scrolls were often kept hidden to avoid improper interpretations and to avoid ridicule or disrespect of the teachings. And once again, citation is needed. But this is something else that is mentioned by Chief Midegah, is that scrolls from birch bark, although a good substance to write on, are not going to last forever. And so periodically, every 15 or 20 years is what he says, and it's reflected here in this article, though it says citation needed, it makes sense. Every 15 or 20 years, the elders or whoever it is who possesses the scrolls and knows where they're buried or hidden goes to them, unfolds them if they need to be unfolded, looks at them, they're read, and then if any of the scrolls are getting too old and they're starting to deteriorate, then the job is to make a new birch scroll and copy what is on the deteriorating scroll over into the new scroll, so that what was on the first scroll ends up being copied onto a new scroll, and thereby these scrolls can continue for much longer than the life of any single scroll would be. Now, unfortunately, because of this, what it means is that we can't take any scroll and date it and find out when the original writing was put on the first scroll. All we can do is date a scroll and say, well, it's 15 years old or it's 10 years old, this scroll. And all we know then is when this writing that's on the scroll was copied onto that scroll from a previous scroll. But the previous scroll is gone, and the scroll from which the contents of that scroll was copied is gone. And so is the father scroll to that, and the mother scroll to that, and so on. All we have is the most recent scroll. So we cannot carbon date the scroll and find out how old the original teaching is. All we can find out is when the teaching was put on this scroll. So that makes it very, very difficult for us to know how far back in time the traditions and writings that we find on these scrolls actually began. And once again, the question being, is it pre-European contact or is it post-European contact? And nowhere is that question more important than when talking about connections in the traditions with Bible stories, Christian stories, those kind of stories that were told to the Native Americans while they were being proselyted by the Europeans. And here's a photograph of a different birch bark scroll. It's really, really beautiful. And you can see the different designs that are made in it. You see there's a snake here. There appears to be perhaps a person or an animal of some sort in a box. Over here to the left in the middle, that looks like a turtle, possibly. To the far right may be fish. To the far left may be boats. I'm just guessing at these. And that's one of the problems, by the way, because when I look at these, I have to interpret them through my social lens. I mean, I'm aware that Native Americans made these, but I'm still interpreting them as a non-Native American. And that can be problematic because I have no idea about the cultural context of these scrolls. And that can affect what it is that's represented in them and the correct interpretation of them. For instance, we have what appear to be trees in the center square, 3 trees. But are they just trees? Are they more than trees? Is the number 3 important? All of those things I would miss completely, together with any stories that might be associated with the 3 trees that would be known in Native American culture. So my being able to look at it, I'm just able to see the surface level, and a lot of the surface level I may be getting wrong because I don't know the background. Going on, the archaeological knowledge of the Birch Bark Scrolls is something that we can talk about scientifically with the limitations that I already mentioned about being able to date the scrolls. We can date the scrolls, but it doesn't give us helpful information about how old the information that is on the scrolls actually is. Again, from the Wikipedia article, 20th century archaeology has confirmed that Native Americans have been using birch bark scrolls for over 400 years. In 1965, the archaeologist Kenneth Kidd reported on 2 finds of trimmed and fashioned pieces of birch bark on which have been scratched figures of animals, birds, men, legendary creatures, and esoteric symbols in the head of the lakes region of Ontario. Some of these resembled scrolls used by the Mida Society of the Ojibwa. And I highlighted Mida because I'm guessing there may be a connection there with Chief Midegah and this name Mida, which is the first 4 letters of his name, at least as it's spelled in English. Kidd concluded these 2 finds of birch bark scrolls and associated artifacts indicates that Indians of this region occasionally deposited such artifacts in out-of-the-way places in the woods, either by burying them or by secreting them in caves. The period or periods at which this was done is far from clear, but in any event, archaeologists should be aware of the custom and not overlook the possibility of their discovery. Another scroll from a different location was later dated to about 1560 plus or minus 70 years. So this one scroll that was found actually was much older than 15 or 20 years. It was over 400 years old, the scroll itself. So that's interesting to know. Now, I believe that in one place, Chief Midegah claimed that the scrolls or what was in the scrolls were 2,800 years old, 2,800 years old. I don't know about that. All I can say is that archaeologically speaking, the oldest scroll that has been found is about 430 years old. I'm not sure the basis on which Chief Midegah says that his scroll or scrolls is 2,800 years old. I'm not sure he mentioned what the basis was, but we don't appear to have any archaeology, at least, that will support that conclusion, at least not at this date. And here's another beautiful birch bark scroll with pictures on it that you can see there. And another one. This is one of the birch bark scrolls. I would have no idea what this means. There appear to be 3 symbols on it. Got no idea what those are. You'd have to be a Native American and or conversant with these symbols to be able to interpret them. And this is a page or 2 out of a book that was written back in the 1840s or 1850s titled The Ojibwe Nation. And in it are copied down a number of the symbols that were used by the Ojibwa when they were writing on their scrolls. You can see that it is an ideographic language. In other words, it's hieroglyphic. There are not letters that we would use in English in order to write out words. And the example is actually on the page in front of us because on page 132, you can see all the English words using the English alphabet and how that looks. And then you get down to the characters used in picture writing. And all of a sudden now we have a very different form of writing, an ideographical form of writing, a hieroglyphic form of writing in which we have figures that represent different things in the environment. You can see they have fish, bear, woman, man, and these are simply drawings to represent those things: life or death, moon, sun. And over here on the right page in the upper left-hand corner, I want you to note this, okay? Because this is actually going to be very important later. I'm just seeing it myself. Up there in the left corner, there is an arch like this, and from it are little squigglies coming down. And that means, at least according to this book, rain or cloudy. So we can see here's the sky, and here's the little pieces of rain coming down from the sky. The reason I'm pointing that out right now with such specificity and asking you to remember it is because this same symbol is going to show up later on one of the birch bark scrolls, and it's going to receive a very different kind of interpretation there. In fact, the way it's going to be interpreted by the Mormons is that these little squiggles coming down from the sky are not rain, but they are spirits coming down from the firmament of heaven who are these children coming down? You see how this game works. You look at this, I wouldn't know what to make of it. A Native American would look at it and say, this means rainy or cloudy. And then a Mormon looks at it and they see Saturday's warrior. That's how the game is played. And we're actually going to see that as we go on, because I've got a number of clips to play for you on this subject. The first clip is going to come from this video. It's titled Chief Midegah, Thousands of Scrolls. It was published around June 1st, 2024, at the very beginning of this month of June. It is from a podcast called The Book of Mormon Heartland Podcast. And I want to play a clip here. It's going to be from timestamp 1228 to 1317, so you can find it if you want to, where the subject of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden being in North America is going to be discussed. All right, and let's play this clip now.
That yes, creation, the Garden of Eden was in North America. That yes, those first two people are still buried in North America. And yes, I have the authority as Oshkabe Wis to take you there and stand you there so you can feel and know yourself that this is true. That yes, we had a big civil war of conflict long before the European came. And yes, when the European came, we weren't in a good place and they didn't help matters. But yes, we had our own seven fires prophecy that said travel to the center of the continent. So it's not all lost. And we did. And for that purpose, we're able to still speak today. Is that too much, Brian?
I'm good with it. There's no complaint on my side. In fact,
so there you can hear Chief Midegah talk about the Adam and Eve story and the fact that they are buried in the North American continent. Very similar to what Mormons believe. Of course, Mormons believe that Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden happened in what is currently the state of Missouri in the county of Jackson. When you actually get into the details of listening to where it is that Chief Midegah says that Adam and Eve are buried, according to his tradition. Now, by the way, his tradition, they're not called Adam and they're not called Eve. They're called something completely different, but it is a couple, man and woman, who are the progenitors of the human family. So, of course, there's that connection between Adam and Eve. And once Mormons hear Chief Midegah say that his traditions, Adam and Eve, lived and died in North America, that really gets the Mormons salivating over how wonderful this information is and how much it corroborates the Book of Mormon and Mormonism itself. The Book of Mormon doesn't talk about Adam and Eve being in North America. The Book of Mormon doesn't talk about Garden of Eden being in Jackson County, Missouri. That was Joseph Smith. So these traditions then are seen by Mormons as corroborating not only the Book of Mormon, but also Joseph Smith as a prophet and the religion that he founded, i.e. Mormonism. We're now going to go to a part of the same video. This will be timestamp 1450 to 1523, where Chief Midegah talks about the flood.
And we know the language was perverted. We know we don't speak the same language as before the flood. We may be able to stand, or I know without a shadow of a doubt, and everybody who's in our communities in the Midegah we win knows that the first father and mother are buried right there in Garden River in that cave called Trap Rock, where a village is enshrined, that because of the Mohawk, that we don't know their language. Why? Because after the flood, we found ourselves in another place. I don't know, throw some wood on water and wait 9 months. You're going to be in a different location.
Okay, so there he talks about the flood in addition to the story of Adam and Eve. So these are traditions that Chief Midegah has in his Native American tradition that he is saying correspond with the Old Testament. Now, the Mormons want to see this as corresponding with the Book of Mormon because the Book of Mormon talks about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It also talks about the Tower of Babel, or as it puts it, the Great Tower in the Book of Ether. So if Native Americans have these traditions from the Mormon mind, it means the Book of Mormon is true, and it really reflects the ancient traditions of the Native Americans. Otherwise, how would they know about them? Well, we've talked about that to some length beforehand, but that is the question that the Mormon has. How could Joseph Smith have known? How could these things have appeared in the Book of Mormon and still be in Native American tradition? It must be true. That's the only conclusion that they can see with their minds, and the only conclusion that their minds will allow them to reach. And now we're going to go to another podcast that Chief Midegah has been on in June. This one's titled The Unified Family model. And it came out around the same time as the first video, around June 1st of 2024. And here in the second video, Chief Midegah is going to give a brief little bit of background about himself. And this is going to be from timestamp 1101 to 1248.
How I became a chief was a 39-year journey. And this is really important to talk about this right now. I was born in northern Idaho, where my grandmother was taken to a boarding school. My father went to prison when I was 2 years old. He gets out next October. I was raised just outside of the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, where I was born in central Idaho, who are also Ojibwe Anishinaabe and speak the language. They were led there through our Seven Fires prophecy, which was a group of 8 prophets that said, I'm going to tell you the future, and you need to go west to ensure that what you have that's sacred, that came from the great peacemaker who visited us, that it survived for the end, because there was a purpose for that. I had lost my tongue at the age of 5.5 and didn't speak for a year. And this is recorded at Tri-State Memorial Hospital in Clarkston, Washington. I was kidnapped with my siblings for about 2 years and lived in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon and Washington, and between the ages of 9 and 11. Following that, was discovered that I had an incredibly high IQ, and they put me in a special learning program. And I was a national level athlete, winning the Northwest Region 13 Junior Olympic Championships for the 5,000 meters when I was in high school, and placing in the top 10 in nationals. From there, I joined the Marine Corps. I had a normal life in the Marine Corps. I got out, I went into business, worked in manufacturing, and rose to a director in 5 years, which I think was a great challenge that I sought, and I achieved it.
So that is part of his introduction of himself, a little bit about his background. Once again, I'm just trying to touch the surface of this individual and the message that he's talking about. And even just touching on the surface, this is going to end up being a rather long introductory podcast on my part. I wanted to announce that this second video is from the podcast that is titled Latter Day Watch. The first one was from Book of Mormon Heartland podcast. This one is from the Latter Day Watch podcast. So that was the first clip from this particular podcast. I want to play several more clips from this podcast. Now I'm going to go to timestamp 1428 to 1525, where Chief Midegah is going to mention the Little Shell tribe to which he belongs and of which he is a leader.
My family has stood in the fought for our rights for the last century. We initiated, along with the Little Shell, who were recognized in 2019 by the federal government, but that didn't mean the day before they weren't real. They fought in the 1964-65 United States Court of Claims to state that what was promised to us has never been awarded. We won. We also won the right that the Pembina Chippewa is 5 regions: the Red Lake Pembina, the Pembina that are at White Earth Reservation, the Pembina that are in the Little Shell in Montana, the Pembina that are in the Little Shell of North Dakota, the Turtle Mountain Chippewa, who are in North Dakota, and the smallest group, the Red Bear Pembina of North Dakota. And because we were intermixed, my family was on 4 reservations, waiting for their promised 1863 reservation.
Okay, so there he talks about the tribe to which he belongs and of which he is a leader, being the Little Shell tribe or the Little Shell Nation. Now, it appears that Chief Midegah is not a man without controversy, and he speaks about that later on in this same video from timestamp 22.00 to 26.15. And he talks about the controversies that surround him and allegations that have been made against him. And Chief Midegah is going to talk himself about some of those controversies and allegations that have followed him, involving allegations of fraud and his being a practitioner of New Age religion. And here's that clip.
If their ancestor is born in Canada, are listed as an Indian, but given a 0 blood quantum in America, so that you have 2 parents who are 0 blood quantum, but the child is 50%, it makes no sense. And in 2019, the same year why they wanted me to talk about it, is the Red Lake Reservation changed their 1958 roll and made everybody that was on that roll full-blooded, which raised the blood quantum of everybody, including myself, which raised it by 20%. And I thought, that's pretty arbitrary. And so I spoke out on this. And the moment I did that, it was as if the sky itself fell upon me. And I found that I popped up into a blog on the internet purporting to call itself the voice of identifying plastic shamans or New Age frauds. And it was immediately after I was selected by the chairman, Tim Kelly, of the International School Network of 500 schools, to speak at the Model United Nations in Germany, where I was at and still doing tribal functions. And as a headman in a traditional clan dukedom, as well as a treaty representatory chief called a treaty signatory. And after I talked, they said I was a European who was masquerading as an Indian, called misappropriation. And so we immediately, this was brought to my attention. And so I sent them my father's membership information, a letter from the Great Plains director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as letters from other officials. They still did not take it off their site, meaning that they're a tabloid that's not ran by anybody who's an Indian. Once that was resolved, they immediately declared that I wasn't from the very community that the membership I have is from. And once that was resolved, they then attacked my twin, who claiming that my twin, who was also speaking against these things, was a fake or a fraud and something was off. And then once they found out my twin was transgender, they stopped touching that topic and they shifted to salacious attacks on my character and my propriety, not realizing that I was in Germany from the summer of 2018 until October of 2021, unable to travel because I had to take care of a 3- and 5-year-old 50% of the time, 6 days at a time. And so I was not capable of traveling. And yet it did not stop. People who I have never met, have never spoken with, have no relationship with, from declaring also in this blog that I was in relationships with at least 30 women in probably 10 states. Shockingly, how could that be possible? So we ignored this. And then when I had to travel in Europe and speak at events, this is important because these are things that are being thrown as a reason not to listen to me right now. And I say, judge someone by the fruit that falls from their tree. And the foundations of success of my life cannot be removed by what is called, I wrote this down to get it right, but tabloid nonsense, void of facts. Slander does not overcome truth. And they started then contacting every speaking event that I went to in Europe and declaring to them before I showed up that I wasn't an Indian. And so I had to carry my papers until in Munich, the head of the International School of Munich declared in a public forum, what is he? Is he being treated like a Jew in Nazi Germany? He's got to carry papers around. In October of 2021, I was capable of traveling again as the parenting plan had shifted to provide the children more of a nest with their mother. And I needed to go back and take care of responsibilities. And so I was then invited to come and meet with the rabbis of the Reformed Church in Boston.
In Boston, he says there. So that's the end of that particular clip. Now, it's obvious from what Chief Midegah says that he is a man whom controversy follows, and a great deal of controversy. Now, of course, he denies any merit to those allegations, and I'm not here to say who is right and who is wrong, only to note that he is a man whom controversy follows, as we find from his own mouth. And indeed, the person who is hosting him on this particular podcast, Latter-day Watch, is now also going to talk about those controversies and why he is not impressed with the controversies, because similar kinds of controversies followed Joseph Smith. And the Mormon host knows that Joseph Smith was a true prophet. Therefore, it doesn't make any difference what controversies might be following Chief Midegah as well. This will be from timestamp 30.33 to 33.25. 5 in the same video from Latter-day Watt. And I believe the host is Brian Nettles, Nettles.
So that's my introduction. And I want to thank you for talking with me, Dan.
Thank you. Brian, is there anything you want to say right here?
I'm actually just very grateful that I could be part of this process. Yeah, I've read years ago, I read books that were written in the mid 1800s that talked about the Ojibwe Nation having records, the Birch Bark Scrolls. I read the story that it was like every 20 years they would go to the place where they had the scrolls, and that they would go through the scrolls, read them, and if any of them were in decay, they would recreate them. And so it's actually been recorded for many years, part of our history, that ancient records have existed with this tribe, the Ojibwe tribe. And I've been very grateful for Chief Midegah and willing to befriend me, reach out to me, and include me in his work. And there have been some people who have brought up some of the slanderous stuff that Chief Midegah is talking about. It was handed to me, and I looked at it and I was like, okay, this is hearsay. Joseph Smith experienced a lot of hearsay during his life. And I think he experienced it his whole life, till the day he died, even till today. And so it's important that we discard hearsay and we go after the truth. And I just think it's fascinating that this is a time when interesting information could come out, that we have good people, even members of the church, who have great knowledge that they can share. And it's a good time that we're going to be able to have new information come out as new records. I'm hesitant to say it's scripture. And I say that because you even look at the Pearl of Great Price. It took many years before the Pearl of Great Price was canonized as scripture. So as we get new records, we see it as records. There are many records, even say like Book of Jasher. Joseph Smith did not have access to the Book of Jasher. We now have access to the Book of Jasher. There are many things in the Book of Jasher which validate the teachings of Joseph Smith. Hold on. Hey, I'm on a call right now. Okay.
That's embarrassing.
And so, we still don't look at the Book of Jasher as being scripture. It's simply records that we have. And it's just exciting to me that we're at a time when records are going to become made available.
So you can see how Brian Nettles and other sympathetic Mormons to Chief Midegah's message respond to the controversy that surrounds him. Well, Joseph Smith had a lot of controversy too. That was hearsay, so we can just disregard it as well. We know that you're a good guy. The Spirit witnesses, you're telling us what we want to hear, and that's all that we're interested in, because it builds up our testimony, right? And Brian Nettles is even talking about the possibility of these scrolls being translated and then becoming part of the standard works. Yes, that is what their hope is, that these scrolls, the Birch Bark Scrolls, will be translated and then become its own book of scripture within the Mormon canon. Now, at the podcast, Book of Mormon Heartland, they have put up a section called Chief Midegah's Credentials. And there's a little video there, but underneath that, it says this on the website. Lately, we are hearing rumors from certain people that Chief Midegah is not who he says he is. I am placing some items here which he personally sent me to verify who he is. It is unfortunate that there are websites in existence which have no problem with bearing false witness against their neighbor based on hearsay. More unfortunate is that people actually believe the lies. So now it's gone from hearsay to lies. This page is meant to help put the record straight. More information will be added to this page as more information is gathered by Chief Midegah and others to prove to the people that he is who he says he is. Now, one of these documents that Chief Midegah presented to this website at Book of Mormon Heartland, in which they posted along with several other documents that are there, is this. This document is titled Appointment as Premier of Little Shell Pembina Nation. And you'll see up there in the letterhead, it says the Little Shell Pembina Nation, Post Office Box in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And what it says is, to whom it may concern, please consider this letter as notice that on October 6, 2021, Mr. Midegah David Taylor Barker, that's Chief Midegah, was appointed by the head chief of the Little Shell Pembina Nation in accordance with Article 4, Section 4, Clause 2 of the Little Shell Pembina Nation Tribal Constitution as premier. So this is a document that says he's the premier, which I'm guessing is similar to being the chief of the tribe, the one who speaks for them, the one who has authority over them, at least to some degree. And it is signed by Brianna Deforme, tribal attorney of the Little Shell Pembina Nation, dated October 10th, 2021. Now, I want to repeat and emphasize once again that I'm not here to take sides on the controversy, either for Chief Midegah or against Chief Midegah. He's already talked about the controversy, as has Brian Nettles, his host, who was interviewing him on that show. I'm just simply showing that this is one of the controversies, is that he purports to be the premier of the Little Shell Pembina Nation in Grand Forks, North Dakota. The problem with that is that on the Anti-Defamation League website, where they put up different hate groups or problematic groups, they have listed, as of at least yesterday, when I pulled this article from their website at the ADL, the Little Shell Pembina Band of North America. And what it says there at the ADL website, which I'm not vouching for, I'm simply reporting, the Little Shell Pembina Band of North America was a fictitious Native American tribe active in the 2000s that was created by sovereign citizens who frequently create bogus Native American tribes or other indigenous groups. During its heyday, members displayed bogus license plates and IDs and engaged in a wide variety of frauds and scams. It should not be confused with the Montana-based Little Shell tribe, a legitimate Native American group. Well, this appears to not be the Montana-based Little Shell tribe. This is the Little Shell Pembina Nation, which got an upgrade maybe from a tribe, I'm not sure, but this one is located in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So that is part and parcel, I believe, of some of the controversy that is swirling around Chief Midegah. Once again, I'm not here to take sides on that controversy, just to report that there is a controversy, as Chief Midegah himself admitted, and Brian Nettles, the host, mentioned as well, although Brian Nettles discounted those controversies because he believes that Chief Midegah is telling the truth. Now going back to a different clip from this same video. In this next clip, Chief Midegah will talk about the Adam and Eve tradition that he has among his people, only their names are not Adam and Eve, and they did not live in a place called the Garden of Eden, at least not in his tradition. Also, they lived and were buried way north. They're nowhere near Jackson County, Missouri. But that doesn't matter. All the dissimilarities do not matter when you are a Mormon. The only thing you're going to look at is that this is a parallel to Adam and Eve. And guess what? They're in North America. It doesn't matter where, anywhere in North America is going to fit the bill and hit the bullseye as far as certain Mormons, such as these, are concerned. So once again, this next clip is from 36.00 to 38.00.
Whereas, for us, at the time the Jesuits showed up in Garden River, at a very sacred place where we believe that the first two people were buried inside of a cave that I've stood upon and stood before.
Where is Garden River?
Garden River is right in the center of the Great Lakes. There's Lake Superior, there's Lake Michigan, and there's Lake Huron, and right in the center is what's called Sault Ste. Marie. It's spelled SAULT STEMARIE. It's a place of rapids, Bawatting. And this was a sacred place because this is where, according to our story, right off of it is an island called Mackinac Island. This is a good introduction to why you don't get it, why this is a big surprise. And also it's going to be a shocking correlation to that young man who went into the woods in New York right before everything just went south real fast. It all lines up. That after the Creator formed the earth, he rested at a place called Sugarloaf Rock on Mackinac Island. That's this really interesting looking structured rock. And we believe that. It's such a significant thing that it was my family that was able to get the state park there to put up a fence to stop people from harming it and taking stones from it. But we believed that the first people went there, had a communication with the Creator, that they sang songs They even returned after they named everything in the world and said, we named everything. And this is some of the things in the scrolls, and the creator said, but I made you. And so they named themselves too. The man called himself Kindness because he gave sound to everything, purpose. And the woman said, my fruit covers the earth like the strawberry. I'm the mother of life. She called herself Ode Amin. Don't let the sounds cause confusion. If the Orthodox rabbis who don't get along with anybody can accept it, and if they're okay with it, it was God himself who changed all the languages, but the meaning in the heart's the same.
Okay, so there is his version of the Adam and Eve story. And once again, as I said, Adam's name isn't Adam. His name is Kindness. Eve is not Eve. I'm not sure it was her name Strawberry. I wasn't quite clear on that. But her name is not Eve. It's not in a garden that's called Eden. It's hundreds and hundreds of miles north of Jackson County, Missouri. So the only similarity is you have a pair, you have a man and a woman who apparently are going to be the progenitors of human life. And they lived up there by the Great Lakes, and they were buried there. And that's the only similarity that I can see between that myth and the Bible. It's very slim, and yet it's enough. And we're not even talking about these sympathetic Mormons wanting it to corroborate the Bible. No, they wanted to corroborate the Book of Mormon, and that is what they are seeing, and that is all that they are seeing, in spite of the fact that there's so much that there's no correlation, and the correlation that there is very strange. In the next clip I have from this interview, Chief Midegah is going to talk about how he has 4 scrolls of these Birch Bark Scrolls, but that there are actually hundreds of these scrolls that are in existence. And this is from timestamp 47.00 to 48.25.
And those words go back to the great peacemaker. And as long as we keep the focus on him, then we're doing the right thing in remembering him and that first mother and father. And so when I received the Birch Bark Scrolls that I have, just 4 that are in 8 parts, I could say it's 8. There's hundreds, but these are the ones that were given to me because of what was important to me. This is what I needed and what needed to be shared. And I thought, I'm not worthy to have these things. And so for a couple years, what do I do with them? And it was only because of the relationship I had with Jews that people call extreme, who were capable of reasoning their own spiritual knowledge against what we were saying, to remember that even the Creator told them that when the remnants come back to that house, it's their responsibility to open the door. And we were the first of many. We are the first of many who sat at that table with them, where they signed that the 7 sacred things that we were able to keep are the same 7 things that they were told to proclaim.
So that's the end of that clip. And there, Chief Midegah is talking about the relationship that he appears to have established with certain Orthodox Jewish congregations or rabbis prior to his making his entrance into the world of Mormonism, at least as far as I can tell. That entrance into the world of Mormonism appears to have really exploded here in this past month. And he has some relationships with Orthodox Jews based upon these same kind of teachings, these same kind of ideas that predate his appearing on these Mormon podcasts. And finally, in the last clip from this show, which is going to be at the 1 hour, 24 minute, 20 second mark to the 1:27:20 mark, that'll be about 3 minutes. Chief Midegah is going to talk about how more scrolls will be coming forth and how it is time for the LDS Church to listen to him. And also for the Mesoamerican Mormons, the ones who believe that the Book of Mormon just took place in Mesoamerica, to sit down, stop talking about this, because really, in Chief Midegah's mind, this was happening throughout the Americas, throughout North America, throughout South America. Those are the people of the Book of Mormon. And it's ridiculous, according to him, to get into these arguments, I'd agree with that, about where the Book of Mormon took place, whether in North America or South America, because it took place everywhere in the Americas. That's his message here. And here is that 3-minute clip.
We end here?
This September, tribes from across North America, Central America, and South America, to include tribes from the Amazon, who recognize they're our brothers and sisters, will be meeting in the Northeast at the Micmac Nation and establishing the lodge again to bring what was carried to all the communities back to one location to see what actually was left. And many scrolls will be coming out, many teachings, because it's our opportunity where we're telling the world it's time for you to listen to us now, because you apparently are forgetting the things you carry that are very similar. And it's time for unity and not division. Watch the movie and start to understand that if those you think should be most opposed to each other are standing in unity, then what's your problem? What's your issue? You should as well. And if you're the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who have built your entire empire upon the special gift and knowledge that the peoples of the other continent came over after the flood, that the peoples of the other continent came over after Jerusalem was sacked, that the peoples from the other continents came over in many migrations, and that what we had was sacred, right? Then as we start to speak as the first generation capable, and it aligns and it sustains what you believe, we're not taking anything away. We're adding on. We're adding on. You're the people that said that Adam and Eve lived in North America. We're the people that said, yes, you're telling the truth. Absolutely are. Doesn't that make me your ally? Right? So, listen and sit with us in the circle, and don't find reasons for division. And if you're the Mesoamerican versus, Heartland people, and you're on social media and you're blasting this stuff out there as if you're acting with a history that was provided by those that orchestrated our genocide that didn't end until I was 4 months old. So maybe you should pump your brakes, have some humility to know that honesty says you don't know what you don't know. And perhaps you should be quiet when you don't know. And when those come try to help you understand, don't try to find reasons to try to take away their voice. My grandmothers and grandfathers are buried on this land back to the flood unbroken, while yours are buried across the water. So don't tell me the history of my ancestors just because it wasn't put in the paper by the very ones who took away the dignity to even be mothers and fathers. I'm speaking to you right now with the same oral authority that those rabbis in Jerusalem speak with the oral Torah. And it's your responsibility to have the human dignity and decency to open your ears and close your mouth.
Well, that got intense. But you can see there where Chief Midegah is talking about the thousands of scrolls that he says are in existence. And Chief Midegah also wants the Mesoamerican Book of Mormon apologists to sit down and shut up. I think that one's directed at you, Daniel Peterson. Just saying. Okay, let's go on to the next clip now. And the next clip is going to be from another podcast, which was released around June 12th. The first two podcasts that we've been mining clips from are from around June 1st. Now we're going to go 12 days later to June 12th, 2024. This is going to be again on the Latter-day Watch podcast. And the title of this episode there is Chief Midegah Has Shown Me a Birch Bark Scroll. And this is what the thumbnail to that episode looks like over there at Latter-day Watch. The first clip from this particular podcast will be from timestamp 4.35, i.e. 4 minutes and 35 seconds, up to 6.26. Here the host is going to be relaying a conversation that he had with Chief Midegah. Chief Midegah is talking to this individual in order to have this individual relay communications on his podcast about what he's talked about with Chief Midegah. And in this segment, the host is going to be talking about how Chief Midegah has told him that he has a meeting with an apostle in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And since this was released on June 12th of 2024, and I think it refers to the meeting happening the following week, this would be something that now, as of the date I'm podcasting this on June 28th, 2024, or the day I'm recording it on that date, that would be in the past now. So if this is correct, Chief Midegah has already had a sit-down meeting with one of the apostles in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Let's listen to this clip, shall we? And here's the introduction to this podcast, which was recorded by Chief Midegah himself.
Ani, I see your light. This is Midegah. I shared an image of one of the scrolls, the one that I'll be bringing to Utah, that I'll also be presenting to one of the apostles, as well as the song associated in the teaching. He's not allowed to share the exact sequence that's on it. He's not allowed to show its image, but he is allowed to talk about it and what he's seen. And it's because of his heart. He comes with a Midu way, the kind way, and it's worth honoring. So Miigwech, thank you.
So that is the introduction then that Chief Midegah gives, talking about this individual who does this show at Latter Day Watch. So now Chief Midegah has given him not the scroll, the first scroll. There's other scrolls, right? But this is all about the first scroll and the way that this is being presented in rather this elaborate, somewhat dramatic method, which is that now he's given an image of the scroll to this person who does this podcast, this sympathetic Mormon. And the sympathetic Mormon can talk about what's in the scroll, but not everything that's in the scroll. It has to be according to the dictates and with the restrictions that Chief Midegah puts upon him. Because Chief Midegah says, yeah, you can talk about this and that, but you can't talk about this. And we'll see this as the sympathetic Mormon relates now to us what it is that he sees on the scroll, though we can't see the scroll. And he's going to try and describe it and talk about the things that he's permitted to talk about by Chief Midegah that Chief Midegah had interpreted for him on the scroll. So here is that part of this clip. And this is going to be from 435 to 626.
And so let's talk about it a little bit. I think also the reason why we should be careful, and I'll talk about it hopefully in a way where I can be sensitive to it or about it. And there's certain things that he's asked me not to really talk about. But as things come more to light, he will bring it here, and I'll share what I can, right? And again, I hope that we can defer to the proper channels about it and wait and see, prayerfully wait and see. But they don't want these scrolls to be hijacked or like taken and used for improper means.
What would those be?
And I think we should be able to totally understand that.
I don't understand
What
that.
I can tell you is they sure look very brittle. This one that I've seen, it is like a landscape, landscape layout sort of thing with this birch bark. Has the grain kind of goes up and down, so you can imagine it rolling. Even though I can't imagine it really rolling very well because you can see cracks in it, and I hope I can get one of these in front of me more than just in this image here. But I'm very curious about the results of. I'm just very curious about how this will go with elder or elder whoever. Okay.
Now hang on a second. Did you notice that he actually said the name of the apostle? So Chief Midegah has not just told this fellow, I have a meeting with an apostle. He has told him, I have a meeting with this apostle, and told the name to this person. But apparently that was supposed to be kept secret too, because this person ends up saying the name of the apostle and then has to go back and delete it from the podcast. No, we don't want anybody knowing what apostle Chief Midegah has an appointment with to talk about the scrolls. All right, so this young man with the podcast over there at Latter Day Watch is saying we need to wait on the proper chain or line of authority, by which I think he means we have to wait and see what the church leaders say about these scrolls. And if the church leaders give them the thumbs up, then we will buy into them whole hog. Otherwise, we need to have some caution. I think that's probably a good idea. I do not imagine that any church leaders are going to be giving a public thumbs up to anything that's in these scrolls, regardless of how they're presented by Chief Midegah, but I suppose time will tell. There are, of course, many other Mormons who don't care whether the apostles give the thumbs up to these scrolls. They're going to be buying it hook, line, and sinker and seeing this as confirmation of their testimony in the authenticity of the Book of Mormon and Mormonism itself. And now this person is going to give a description of the first scroll. He has the image on his computer, and now he's going to be describing in painful detail to us what's on the scroll and what it is that he's permitted to say that Chief Midegah told him it means. So this is going to be from 626 to 1014 in this video.
What is so interesting about this is as soon as you look at this, there are a few things that just draw your eye immediately. And so on a portion of this, you can recognize things that look like the cave sort of paintings of like a oxen, that sort of style, but it is so mixed together with things that should be very recognizable to members of the church who view the facsimiles like very striking in that manner. And members of the church should find this extra sort of fascinating. We have this sort of firmament we have this sort of firmament above. And it's so interesting to see kind of what is draping from this firmament. You have a snake, which, if you're familiar with the Serpent Mound up in, where is it, Ohio? I'm not sure, and he's eating something. That is very familiar to what is going on. You have somebody that looks like they're on a throne, and upon the throne we have a number of interesting symbols. A hand in the sky, whatever that would mean. We have...
By the way, as this scroll is being described, keep in mind the fact that at the end of this program, when we finally get to the end of this program, Chief Midegah will actually reveal and allow this person to reveal the image from the scroll itself. And it's interesting to compare how he describes the scroll when I can't see it and the image I'm getting in my mind versus what the scroll really looks like, which is much less interesting and much less impressive from a Mormon point of view. Going on.
A bird kind of above this throne, which I don't know if that's like a interpretation for God, but there's like the spirit of God or something like that, if I'm remembering that right. I just zoom in on this. We have what I don't necessarily know if it's for sure supposed to be a side profile of a man with their mouth open, and it's like speaking certain things. I don't know if that's what that interpretation of that specific thing is supposed to mean, but you could maybe interpret it that way. If you were like, as a layman, you could maybe wonder. There's a couple different figures in here.
Now, a lot of you may be wondering, why don't you just show the scroll itself and get rid of this person describing the scroll, since we know that after this video, Chief Midegah did produce the scroll for public inspection, or at least public viewing. The reason is because I think it's important to document the manner in which Chief Midegah has been slowly, incrementally moving up to the revealing of the scroll itself. And that's by going through sympathetic Mormons on their websites and having them describe the scroll to the audience, which is what happened here on June 12th of 2024. Let's continue with this a little bit more, shall we? As this individual describes the scroll as best he can.
And again, like I can't really say what he told me, even though I'm sure those things will come to light. And I can just say that I am so taken by it in light of my temple experience. So it's just interesting to see these things happening. And I hope, and I think as members of the church, we can be very prayerful for more light. And so I'm glad that this is not trying to be like a splinter movement, because some of this stuff becomes like a splinter movement. And I am glad that a member of the quorum will get a chance to view this, and we will see. Again, I am not, like, it looks great to me, but I don't study this stuff, and it's just very, very striking. And I hope that you guys can see this soon.
Well, we are going to see it soon, and we will be able to make our own determination as to how striking we feel the contents of this scroll are. So now we're going to go to another podcast. This will be the Book of Mormon Heartland podcast. Once again, the one we were just watching was the Latter-day Watch podcast. This other one's going to be the Book of Mormon Heartland podcast. Again, it appears that Chief Midegah is kind of tag teaming between these two podcasts and allowing the sympathetic Mormons that run them to get his message out, to talk about the things he allows them to talk about, to show the things that he allows them to show, but to not talk about the things that Chief Midegah does not allow them to talk about, and to not show the things that Chief Midegah does not allow them to show. So the next podcast thumbnail looks like this, and it actually does look like this as you pull it up, and you can see that this is a copy of that same book open to the same page that I looked at before, with the different images that are transcribed there that are found on these Ojibwa Birch Bark Scrolls from a book written back in the 1840s or the 1850s. It's a little bit blurrier here, but this is what it looks like. Once again, this is from the Book of Mormon Heartland podcast, titled The First Birch Bark Scroll That Will Be Revealed by Chief Midegah, and this was published around June 12th, 2024, the same date as the podcast we just looked at. The first clip I'm going to play you from this podcast is from the beginning to the 45-second mark. You will hear the person say that they have seen the scroll, but they can't talk about it. And indeed, this almost seems to be like Joseph Smith showing the plates to certain witnesses, but he's showing the scrolls to certain witnesses as well, and making it very clear what it is they can and can't talk about from having seen this scroll and having heard his interpretation of the scroll. Here's that first clip.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Nettles, and I just finished watching a little podcast by Dan from Latter-day Watch, where he was talking about being able to see one of the Birch Bark Scrolls. I, too, have been shown the Birch Bark Scroll and explained a little bit about what's in it. I, too, was told that I cannot go into great detail of what I see. I can just talk about generalities of what I see. But before I go into that, I wanted to point out some 2 pages from this book, The Traditional History of Characteristic Sketches of the Ojibwe Nation, written by George Copeway, and it was written, I believe, in around 1850s.
Okay, so there's the very beginning from that video, and we can see once again, or we can hear once again, how it is that Brian Nettles, another sympathetic Mormon, is going to be taking his directions from Chief Midegah as to what he can say and what he can't say. And all of this because he's feeling quite honored, of course, for having been vouchsafed a view of an image of the scroll itself. And by that, I mean the first scroll that Chief Midegah is presenting in this way. There are other scrolls, and he says there's hundreds and thousands of scrolls that people have. So this is just the very first scroll, and it is a rather dramatic unveiling over time of the contents of this scroll that's going on. The next clip from this podcast will be from the 3:18-minute mark to the 6:07-minute mark, where Brian Nettles is going to be showing diagrams on the screen and describing, in his words, what is on the scrolls. So just as Chief Midegah had this individual Dan from Latter-day Watch do the same thing we just saw, that he's going to have Brian Nettles over at the Book of Mormon Heartland podcast do a similar thing, which is looking at an image of the scroll that we can't see, but he's going to be describing what it is that he has seen and talking about what it is that he has been told he can talk about. Once again, this is from 3:18 to 6:07.
Of pages following this, you can see here on the next couple of pages, he shows some characters used in the picture writing. So what I see in the scroll is not these symbols, but they're like unto it. I've pointed out in the Michigan artifacts in the past how when you've got the line coming from the mouth, it indicates to speak, or the line coming from the eyes, it indicates to see. So very interesting. The next page just has a couple more images for your viewing. Okay, now I'm just going to talk about what I see in this scroll. The first thing I see it has a hand, an imprint of a hand on it, which I'm told represents I did it. I also see a mountain on it that has what is potentially the creator sitting at a throne. I see a serpent, And the serpent appears to be eating human-like spirits, like it's going after the spirits of the world. Since he's been cast out of the garden, he's going to do his best to consume.
Did you notice all of that Christianization that got put on a picture on the scroll of just a serpent who appears to be eating something? So that something now is going to be a spirit, a human spirit, and he's going to now Mormonize the rest of it. So his interpretation of a simple serpent on a scroll ends up becoming proof that the Book of Mormon is true to this individual, Brian Nettles. Let's go on.
And take over the spirits of man. I see various symbols in here. One of them is kind of like unto speaking, as I pointed out on the book. But it seems to have symbols on it that probably represent what it's saying, and I don't know what they are. Let's just say that there are symbols on here which are like unto the symbols that are in the book I just showed you, but they're not the same symbols. So they're symbols that were simply not taught in his book. And there's a small clump of symbols that almost look like letters, and I'm not certain what those letters indicate also. There is a bird on it. So let's just say I've seen the Birch Bark Scroll. There's a very sacred feel to it. Even though I don't know what it all indicates, it sounds like it's something to do with the garden. And I believe, based on what I've read and now from what I see and the sacredness that I feel, that it is an important artifact. So we'll just leave it at that. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
So that is the end of that particular podcast. So notice that based upon what he sees and how he interprets the diagrams on this scroll as being so Mormon, it's amazing. A serpent can prove Mormonism true if it's on a birch bark scroll and if you have the right guy interpreting it. But he also feels that these are holy. So he has a holy feeling. He has a witness from the Holy Ghost. Brian Nettles, therefore, understands that these are sacred scrolls, at least the one that he's looking at, that he has been allowed to be a witness to, along with this other guy, Dan, over at Latter Day Watch. And both of those podcasts, those two podcasts where they're looking at the scroll and describing it, both of those happened basically the same day. And I think it was on or around June 12th, 2024. The first two podcasts we looked at were from June 1st or about June 1st, 2024. The next two, where they're allowed to describe the scrolls, and we have two witnesses of the scrolls, come from June 12th. And now more recently, we actually get to see the scroll because Chief Midegah came to Utah. He went to a conference. I think it was called the Promised Land Conference. And there he revealed the image of the scroll. And after Chief Midegah had presented the image of the scroll, he allowed Dan at Latter Day Watch podcast to present the image of the scroll too. And that's how we finally get to see it. So this is very interesting to have first heard two sympathetic Mormons describe what they see as the contents of this scroll, and then actually see the scroll itself. The same scroll that they were seeing but not showing and only describing, we now get to see and compare their descriptions with what's actually on the scroll itself. In a word, I would say the actuality of what's on the scroll. It's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's Native American, it's traditional. My criticism of what's on the scroll has nothing to do with that. My criticism of what's on the scroll has to do with how it has nothing whatsoever to do with Mormonism or with the Bible. Only a strained interpretation of it will allow that connection to be made. And this will be from the Latter Day Watch program. And this is the thumbnail. I have been asked to share the image and song of this birch bark scroll. So, of course, this individual does whatever he's told, and he's going to share the image and he's going to talk about it. And we finally get to see it as well. And this will be a somewhat longer clip. It's going to be from 6:01 to 21:22. I'm going to speed it up a bit because this individual, I think his name is Dan, doesn't talk that quickly. So I'll speed it up to 1.25 so we can get through it a little bit faster. But I don't think we'll miss anything important in the process. And here's that clip. Speed it up to 1.25.
We have here on his little booth, and I was able to get real close to this. So it's a massive eagle feather that sticks right on the front. This is his, I believe it's called the Council Fire Rock, but it's basically his authority to speak. And within the top here, you fill it with oil. Put a wick there and it burns for about, for a few hours, whatever. And so that's what he put that up on his rock, on the podium when he went up there, and he had this on, and he brought the scroll with a frame, and it's very small. I would say, it's not even. It was very, very, very small. Think about it as a frame, maybe like this big, right? Almost like a little photograph. And you could see things very, very clear within this scroll. So I'm going to just go to it and mention a couple other things. So this is him presenting this to everybody. And this is an image he shared with me earlier here. Let me just maybe hide my face a little bit. Give you a peek, but we'll get a closer look. And when you hold it, you can see how kind of a little bit warped this birch bark is and how brittle it is. You wouldn't be able to fold it. It would just snap. And you can see things much clearer, especially up in this corner here where it doesn't really show so well. So before going into it, though, the tradition is of 3 brothers in the 1st century AD. One associated, I believe, with the Ottawa, another with the Ojibwe, and another with the Potawatomi. Am I saying that right? And they are the keepers of the paths or the fires, or the ones who light the trail back home. And so it seems like they feel that the 7th fire has been lit and it's time to light the trail back home. And I don't want to mix up things, but I believe they are also the ones who it might not be this Potawatomi, but it has to do with another group with the deer that they are in charge of, or they laid a lot of the trails that like the Hudson Bay Company and people like that wanted to use. And it's just interesting to see this, and also interesting to see this 3 brothers tradition that they have that has gone back for 2,000 years. And you can make of that what you will with your connection reasoning.
Now, wait a second. I've just got to say, what is he talking about? There's a tradition about 3 brothers going way back. And he says, you can make of that what you will with your connective reasoning. What is he talking about? Is he talking about God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the 3 beings in the Godhead? Or is he talking about, heaven forbid, the 3 Nephites? Is that what he's talking about? 3 brothers, you can make these connections. All you need is the barest description. And immediately the fertile imagination starts making these connections to whatever religious tradition it is that you believe. In this case, it happens to be Mormonism. So he's going to see the connection with the 3 Nephites or whatever it is he's thinking, because I'm not seeing any connection. I think that any connection that's made has to have a healthy dose of creativity ladled in order to make that connection stick. It doesn't exist on its own, not without this individual coming from a sympathetic Mormon background, making the connection in the first place, and then suggesting to the audience that it's so obvious that you can make of it what you will. It's an inside joke, right? We both know what this means. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But I don't know what it means, and I'm not sure it's obvious at all to any impartial person what the heck that connection would be anyway. Let's go on with this clip, though.
And that they have this sacred responsibility to share this and make sure that people are connected, and so that the priests also know what to say within the lodges as they do these or they keep these traditions sort of going. He also expressed again that within the presentation, the first one, that the mud of the first people, or the Micmac, the mud of the Micmac nation, the Mi'kmaq, might be saying that wrong. See, I'm an idiot. So why did he ask me? But he has, so whatever. That is the mud where the first people were created. So let's go into this a bit. This first, and you can go on to Brian Nettles' channel where he will have a lot of the symbols and he'll express more and more about this. I believe it's just the Book of Mormon Heartland channel. But let's go into a few things. This hand means I did it. And who did it? That would be the creator who did it. He made something. We have the white raven up here, which I believe represents the beginning and the end. So the creator created the beginning and the end. The Great Spirit did that. We have this firmament. And upon, or draping from the firmament, as I mentioned in my other thing, you have these spirits kind of draping from the firmament. And within all of this, I believe this bottom part is the earth, like this hatching right down here, that we are all placed within this temple or sacred space. On the right, we have some, it's a song. On the left, we have the story of a man on a throne holding what looks to be a golden seed. Doesn't that look familiar, hey? All of this. And I want you to consider maybe what this seed is. Above him are some symbols. We have these two staves, which are union, or coming together, like Exodus staves. And below is separation. And a lot of what is happening, or it seems to be happening, if I understand correctly, is this coming back together. And the children, or the creator, having this put together as a means of gathering and bringing people back home. In front of this man on a throne, we have a mountain where God sat to give this knowledge. On top, we have this glowing little symbol here, which also seems to be this, which is tethered to this turtle, which I believe the turtle is Earth. And below, I believe this is the spirits kind of going back or something like that. Forgive me for not understanding it all, but we have a snake eating or attempting to consume one of these spirits. And there's a portion of this that he does not want shared until it happens in Wisconsin. So it's going to be very interesting to see. So there are three possibilities, I guess, in his mind of what to make of Joseph Smith. The first, go to another image here maybe, so you can see this one. The first is that Joseph, as a 14-year-old boy, went into the woods, saw an Ojibwe lodge, copied the teachings, but he was 14 years old, didn't know the language, seems very unlikely.
Okay, so what's going on here is that now is being presented Chief Midegah's teaching about what could have happened. How could it be that the Ojibwe teachings show up in Mormonism with Joseph Smith? I think we've seen that really they don't. It's not that impressive at all. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with Mormonism when compared with the few isolated things which, when taken out of context and misinterpreted, could look like they support Mormonism, like the Three Brothers. Big, fat, hairy deal. But this guy sees the Big Brothers tradition among the Native Americans, the Ojibwe, as being confirmation in some way of Mormonism or the Book of Mormon. That's how eager these people are to find something that will corroborate the Book of Mormon. That's how starved they are for any kind of evidence that will support their testimony of the Book of Mormon. And now Chief Midegah is going to say, well, there's only three ways. that Joseph Smith could have found out about this information from the Ojibwa, leaving aside the fact that it's not been established at all that his teachings or his writings, the writings of Joseph Smith or his teachings, really contain anything that's obviously derived from the Ojibwa Native American tradition. That's the thing you haven't established first. But he's pretending that he's already established it and now going to say, how could Joseph Smith have known this? We've been down this road before. And every one of his examples are going to be Joseph Smith somehow became exposed to the Ojibwa tradition, and that's how it shows up in the Book of Mormon. Well, you haven't even established that it's in the Book of Mormon first, but that's going to be the argument. All three of his examples will be ridiculous, impossible, couldn't have happened, and therefore Joseph Smith must be a prophet. So we've seen the first one. Let's allow him to continue with these other examples.
Another is that he was praying. The elders took pity on him, took him in. And remember, the three brothers believe, they believe in the three brothers who founded the Three Fires Council and wanted it to continue to the end. So they initiated him in this lodge where the men and women are separated, looking at each other, but separated, taken to a curtain to be given their ceremonial name and learn the way to return home. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar to Masonry too. And remember, the early white European Christian missionaries to the North American Native American tribes didn't only try and convert them to Christianity, they also tried to convert them to Masonry and institute lodges, Masonic lodges, among the Native Americans. And here he's even talking about the fact that these Native Americans are in a lodge where they're replicating, in some sense, some vague sense, what we find in the Masonic tradition as well. Of course, from the Masons, it went not only to the Native Americans, but also to the Mormons. So now, leaving out Masonry and only looking at Mormonism and the Native Americans and seeing a similarity there, boom, they say Mormonism is true. As long as you keep Masonry off stage, you can come to that conclusion. But once you allow for the fact that Masonry exists and existed and was taught to the Native Americans hundreds of years ago in North America, all of a sudden that connection does not become that astonishing. Let's see what his third example is.
Like, they don't believe that anyone initiated some 14-year-old boy. The third one is that the great peacemaker kept his promise. There would be a remnant continued on until all sit in the circle of the human family again, and that he was actually a prophet.
So there is the third possibility, that Joseph Smith was a prophet. Obviously, the first two possibilities don't make it because Joseph Smith was not inducted into Ojibwa tradition. So he would not have known about these things from the Ojibwa. See, he didn't know about them from the Ojibwa. He knew about them from the Masons. And as Professor Thomas Murphy has written about, as well as other Native American anthropologists, in creating the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith drew not only on the Old Testament and the New Testament and other ideas in his community, he also appears to have drawn on local Native American traditions in coming up with stories and even names for figures in the Book of Mormon. So here we have a situation of Joseph Smith actually taking stories and names from the Native Americans around him, putting them in the Book of Mormon, and now 200 years later, we have someone looking at the Book of Mormon and saying, holy smokes, there's Native American names and places and stories in here. It must be true. That is the problem with this type of reasoning. Let's continue on with this clip to the end. There's a few more minutes of it. I'm sure you're having a good time actually being able to see what's on this bark and comparing it with what was described to be on the bark by Chief Midegah's two witnesses.
So,
yes.
Well, I'm going to go to the song, but the purpose of this, it seems like in his mind, is that we are all the same tribe or family. Again, he said, don't let the language confuse you. One family split a long time ago, destined to come home. And I believe they feel like, they have a role. They have a role in a part of this gathering. So that's interesting. Very interesting. And this is the scroll of the first father that is being shared. So he read it and he sang it, leaving out part or two. And he's letting me share it here. So,
by the way, you can also see in this still from the slide of the scroll that the circle with the hole in it on top of the mountain that he said was the glory of God, you can also see it two places over here. On the right, there's one over here next to Chief Midegah's head, and then there's one directly below that as well, which you can see once I continue to play this video.
Oh, here we go. So, and I'm not going to sing it, obviously. I came from the earth, and I came from the sky. So you can see it a little better. Came from the earth, and I came from the sky. The wind upon the mountain's crest touched me. I listened to the soaring eagle's cry. I am the color of flowers, the gentle bee soaring high. How far can I see? What is my lesson? Will I remember God? Kindness is my path, the only answer to be found. Love is the only treasure. We walk on the earth made for you and I. We are lights amidst darkness. We are stars in the dark sky. And there's a portion that doesn't want shared here.
Why doesn't he want it shared? I don't understand that. Maybe he has a good reason for it. But notice that this entire song, the lyrics of the song that this individual is reading, he's not singing it, of course, but he's reading it, have nothing to do with Mormonism. It's a beautiful song, beautiful lyrics, very Native American, but nothing to do with Mormonism. And yet he reads it in such a way as if he has discovered the Holy Grail that proves the Book of Mormon true.
I am swinging and I am moving like a spirit. I move creation because I live like a child. I'm going to tell you about the sky. I speak to the water in the sky because I am you and you are me. I'm going to offer my help to all of you with my heart, my great medicine. Because I use my heart when I speak to you.
Yes.
In all my senses, what do you speak to me, Great Spirit? Because I look around and I see dark spirits working, and they try and cloud my way. But you told me that our love is the clear sky. So I will send the dark spirits elsewhere, because my thunder is heavy for them. I am the spirit in this man crying out. Father, I am calling. All of your creation hears me. This is what he told me. O Great Spirit, come here and help me always. Let us always have healing together so we can clear the day of the dark spirits. You told me, Father, I am a sign upon this earth, that the day would be made clear. You told me, Creator, that we bring strong healing with our hearts to all creation. So I thank you, Creator, who sees, it might be seeds, I believe, who sees all and placed me here. I will use your heart you put within me as a medicine for healing. This is my great gift to the Creator. My friend, this is the great gift to the earth, my friend Creator. How do you receive my heart, my friend, my Creator?
And that is, I believe, the end of his reading of the song lyrics that Chief Midegah interpreted from this scroll. Now, I have no reason to think that those lyrics or that description is in any way wrong, but what the heck does it have to do with Mormonism? Honestly, you can read all of this stuff. There's 95% of the stuff has nothing to do with Mormonism. 5% maybe, if you really, really try, okay, there's a God who created the earth. Yeah, that's only in Mormonism. You've got the appearance of a man and a woman to be the progenitors of the human race. Yeah, that's only in Mormonism. That's only in the Bible. So it's not really clear how these small connections that are the barest and the most strained of connections now become proof that this scroll and the contents of it, as interpreted by Chief Midegah, become proof of Mormonism. And once again, one of the main examples has to do with that firmament, that arch that you can see on the scroll as it's projected behind Chief Midegah, and the little squiggly lines coming down from it, which are not spirits coming down from heaven, but it is the rain coming down from heaven. That is a classic instance of a diagram or a symbol that has meaning in one culture, the culture that created it, but now being seen by another culture, that meaning gets lost and it gets reinterpreted within the framework of the Mormon culture that is seeing it, that wants this to be evidence that the Book of Mormon is true and wants this to be evidence that Mormonism is true. So now we have come to the end of this podcast. That has been an overview of Chief Midegah, of his teachings, at least as they relate to Mormonism. Once again, he talks about many other things that don't have a Mormon connection. I've tried to restrict this podcast to what he has to say about Mormonism and these Birch Bark Scrolls, which he is bringing forth slowly but surely, and how it is being received. And actually, he's kind of teaching it this way. I mean, these guys aren't making this up on their own. He is suggesting to them, Chief Midegah is suggesting to them, that these show that Mormonism is true, that they have the same tradition, and these guys are definitely eating it up like popcorn. What will happen in the future with Chief Midegah, we'll have to see. Whether an apostle is going to come out in general conference in October and announce that, yes, he is the apostle who met with Chief Midegah, that Chief Midegah showed him the scroll, and that the apostle then went to President Nelson and got permission to whip out the seer stone from the church vault, put it in a hat, and start translating so they could add to the standard works. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be happening in October. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. I don't think that's going to be happening ever, because the leaders of the LDS Church are not going to share their prophetic authority and power with some outsider, regardless of whether it's a Native American or somebody else. And indeed, history repeating itself as it does, this looks like it might have the same kind of earmarks as Elder George P. Lee back in the 60s and 70s, who began making similar kinds of statements and demands of the first presidency and was sent packing for it. So we'll have to see what happens. As I say, if anything else great happens, I'll be here to report on it. And I wish Chief Midegah all the best in his future endeavors. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. Thank you for your donations. If you haven't donated yet, please go to radiofreemormon.org, hit the donate button, and make a donation today, a continuing donation if you can. $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you can afford. Your contributions keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. Well, that is about all for tonight. Until next time, this is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.